This has been 1 year since our biggest event yet, and this has surpassed last year's event. I've been given the numbers by staff. This is our biggest event yet, and next year it's going to be even bigger. Now, when we gathered for this, what is now going to become an annual tradition, it's going to become a tradition for our group, for our party, and for our people eventually. Labor Day is our day from now on. The last time we gathered for this very event, last year in Ohio, I spoke about the moral case for white nationalism. My point was that, contrary to the narratives peddled by the Jewish media, our cause is driven by a moral imperative, and the brainwashing and the gaslighting we go through as white people to make us think otherwise is itself the worst form of racial bias, racial discrimination, and racial hate. We are constantly told by the Jewish media and the institutional structure of America that words are equivalent to violence. I think Warren talked about this. An uncomfortable truth spoken about race can damage the self-esteem and confidence of a black person so badly that it ruins their chances at life and gives them no choice but to be a violent criminal. And in turn, this leads to stereotyping of them as violent criminals, which means police officers shoot and kill them willy-nilly. Now, this is factually not even true, but it's a story you're told every day of your life through a myriad of different information systems. The idea that words are violence is not true, but words can lead to violence. Being constantly told by powerful and influential people that you are racially unworthy of group representation, that taking collective action as a race is the worst moral crime you can commit, can be understood as a form of indirect violence. It leads to what we've called stochastic terrorism. This is a term that's been brought up earlier tonight. The message is sent through all social information systems. White people are moral devils. Violence against us is legitimate, thus generating more violence and a sense of impunity amongst those that prey on us. It creates an atmosphere where whites lack any ability to stop this violence and the injustices done to us by engaging in collective racial self-defense. White people will either believe these anti-white narratives, or they'll think enough others do that they just keep their mouths shut. This is why the moral case was so important. But I made that case last year. And if you guys want to go and watch the speech again, you're more than welcome. Send it to your friends, send it to your relatives, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your coworkers. Send it to everybody. But increasingly this year, in my experience and in talking to our wonderful activists who featured in that great video we just watched, they go leafleting, protesting, talking to ordinary white Americans on the street, or at Trump events, or at the Jason Aldean concert. The objections and doubts they face don't concern a moral objection. They don't morally object to what we're saying. That doesn't make them angry, they're not outraged. In fact, usually they say, that's nice. But the hardest sell is to convince them that it's possible, that we can actually do it, that our vision can even be achieved. This is the harder sell right now. Believe it or not, we've made the case. They can't argue with our case. That's why they shut us down from everything. Our job now is to make other white people understand that we can really do it. That's the task ahead of us today. Now, a lot of the responses we get are, sure, it would be great, but this is pie in the sky thinking. Now, I understand that I can even somewhat sympathize with people that might say this. In some sense, they're right. The odds against us are absolutely daunting. There's no question about that. But there are two possible responses to this objection. The first is to simply say, man up. Man up. Woman up as well. Man and woman up. Who cares? We have to do it anyway. I'd rather fight and die than never fight at all, right? Now that viewpoint represents the moral power of our case. But the second is to say, well, actually, it's not really as infeasible as you may first think. There's a practical dimension, and we have to be able to make that case as well. It's easy to say this should happen. It's much harder to say it can happen. But there's a lot going for us. There's actually a lot going for us. It's challenging for us to make the case to ordinary Americans that our vision is possible. But it's impossible for the pig American system to make their case. This system can't convince anyone that its vision is possible. Can they? They can't. They can't convince anybody. The idea that all races can live together in harmony with no inequalities, no discrimination, no violence, no negative thoughts, no unequal or disparate outcomes, and that any failure to achieve this state of absolute equality can only be the fault of one thing and one thing only, and that is white racism. I can't believe that anybody believes that. It's so dumb, I feel stupid even repeating it. Now, whether this vision is actually the agenda of the Jewish elites that drive our system, or whether it's simply a facade, it doesn't really matter. No matter what their actual agenda is, it relies on this message being sent and received across all media channels and being reinforced by all major institutions. We can speculate all we want about what the Jews really want, but one thing is a rock-solid fact. They need everyone to believe this bullshit in order to achieve it. That's for sure. That's for sure. And people just don't. And they shouldn't. This system is rapidly approaching a state of complete dysfunction. And this is mainly due to the Jewish anti-white institutional ideology. White people are simply checking out, and systems that rely on an overwhelmingly white worker base are rapidly falling apart. For example, vital systems, emergency medical services, a field I'm sure many in this audience are familiar with and have worked in. I know many people, many of my personal friends, some of you may know them, have worked in this field. This field is 85% white. Now, it doesn't surprise me or anyone here that the vast majority of people that are willing and capable of putting up with the high stress and the grueling demands of that work in order to serve others are white. Is anybody here surprised by that? No. Yet the anti-white bias and the violent assaults from out-of-control patients of color, that's a new term I've coined here, patients of color, POC, have gotten so bad that 67% of all emergency medical workers have reported at least one violent assault in their career. Yeah. As a result, applications for new emergency medical workers have fallen by 65% since 2019. 65% since 2019. Policing is no better. There are shortages of dispatchers and officers. Police departments regularly around the country operating at 40% lower capacity than they would need to be fully staffed. The public safety implications of both of these facts should be obvious. Life in America is getting significantly more dangerous, and institutional anti-white ideology is at the core of it. Other vital fields such as teaching, firefighting, and social work also rely on overwhelmingly white worker base. And these are failing more as people in these fields report that they want to quit, and fewer people show any desire to sign up for them. This all seems like terrible news, and it is. It means all of our lives are going to get more difficult, more dangerous, and frankly, more unsecure, more uncertain. We don't know what the future is going to hold for us. You don't know what's going to happen if you get hurt, if you're attacked, if there's an incident in your neighborhood, if the police will show up, if somebody has an emergency, if they suffer some injury, if they can actually trust that an ambulance will arrive. This is going to be uncertain in all of our lifetimes. But however, it's good news in a sense. I understand it's actually terrible news, but hear me out. When people no longer believe in the system they live under, it makes our job of convincing them that an alternative vision is not only moral and desirable, but actually possible. It makes that job that much easier. We don't have to contend against a current credible system, because this system isn't credible. It has no credibility. It has no credibility. People may have their doubts about our vision, but there's no doubt about the present system, is there? It's simply untenable. There's no doubt about that. And white people are more politically willing to agree with us than you might think. For example, a recent SPLC poll showed that 40% of Americans think the changing demographics of the country represent a threat to white people and their values. While not an absolute majority, in raw numbers, this is well over 60 million adults. And if we assume that most of these respondents are white, and considering the overall white representation in the population, this number indicates that at least half of white adults believe this. Now, those are absolutely massive numbers, and it will be impossible for any system to contend with a group organized along these lines in such numbers. Impossible. They could not sustain themselves against it. So this is why the system does whatever it can to keep whites depoliticized, or else winding their way down political blind alleys like national conservatism or phony Christian nationalism. The same SPLC poll also showed that more than 60% of younger Republican-leaning men and women believe that the demographic replacement of whites is a deliberate process, while 54% of Democrat-leaning young people believe the same thing. Some of them might be in favor of it, but they believe it, which means that there's no hiding it anymore, right? If even our racial enemies, or people that consider themselves as such, are openly saying this, that's good. Say it. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Let's have the conversation. Let's talk about it. If they're so brazen that they're saying it, well, you make our case for us. A UMass Amherst poll in 2022 found that 37% of all Americans expressed a similar sentiment in agreeing that the population of the United States is being deliberately replaced by a more obedient demographic. I don't think I need to explain the obvious dog whistles involved in this language, right? The obvious evasions involved here. Additionally, May 2022 YouGov poll found that 48% of white Americans of all walks of life agreed that anti-white bias and discrimination is a serious problem. And that's the 48% that were willing to risk saying that in a poll. We all know about, the Bradley effect? What is it, Bradley? The effect where you don't want to tell even pollsters your opinion because the system is just so totalitarian that you're afraid even they're going to snitch on you. And this is just some of the more recent polling. In 2018, political scientist George Hawley found that in raw numbers, roughly 11 million white Americans agree, not with vague ideas of white replacement or anti-white discrimination, but with hard ideological tenets of white identity politics, which at the time was referred to as the alt-right. Hawley was widely attacked for this study, and later on he altered some of his definitions to soften the blow to, frankly, the Jews that pay him of what he found, but the raw data didn't change. He measured 3 core tenets, and these were racial identification with being white and thinking that that's important, a belief in the importance of racial solidarity with other whites, and a sense of white racial victimization. 11 million people believe that in America. There are 11 million people that agree strongly with all 3 of these tenets. And can anybody doubt that those numbers have only grown in the last 5 years, given all the pressures and the trials and the violence that we've gone through over these last 5 years? So right now, our task as the NJP is to find these people and convince them to join us. Large numbers of whites observe and agree with the background ideas and premises of our movement, while a surprisingly large number of them agree with ideas that make them willing to actually become active in our struggle, active in the white nationalist cause. But no matter what, nobody believes in the sick and rotten Jewish system that we live under now. No one believes in that. And as usual, the main impediment to whites coming to the necessary political conclusions is, as always, you know what I'm going to say, the Republican Party and the conservative movement. Their focus is on promoting fake politics, fake ideas, euphemisms like wokeness or the Great Reset as placeholders for anti-whiteness and the Great Replacement. This is a deliberate attempt to gatekeep and depoliticize whites. These are not opportunities for infiltration or red pills. They are red herrings, not red pills. And worst of all, is the corrupting focus on playing Team Red versus Team Blue, as if this staged political conflict has any real meaning. A good example of this is the current migrant crisis in New York. Right now, New York State is a scene of a 4-way political fight between Eric Adams, the black mayor of New York City, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York State, Bill Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, and the Biden administration, all of them Democrats, over where to house the massive number of illegal immigrants that are flowing into the state. The crisis has only been exacerbated by recent opinion polling showing that 82% of New York residents want the flow of migrants to stop, and they want it to stop at the border, not of New York, but of America. This in a liberal stronghold state like New York. Now, instead of trying to utilize this godsend of majority opinion on this issue to force through a political mandate and actually shut down the border, what is the GOP doing? They're breaking their own arms, patting themselves on the back for causing Democrat infighting. I read a Fox News article just this morning, so they're congratulating themselves for the policies of the Republican governors, Greg Abbott of Texas, Ron DeSantis of Florida, among others, of busing migrants from the border deeper into the country to blue states. They're saying this policy is working because these 4 powerful Democrats are at each other's throats and arguing with each other. And it looks dumb. Yeah, it looks dumb, but so do you. I mean, come on. Like, do you want, it's obvious that actually shutting down the border isn't the agenda. The actual violence and social chaos caused by this unprecedented flow of illegal South American and even African immigrants, it doesn't matter. The fact that these people will never leave, will permanently be a part of our national future, it doesn't matter. libs owned, right? That's the thinking. That's the corruption of party politics. That's the corruption of Republican and Democrat partisan politics. The meaningless game of hypocrisy bingo takes precedence over political and demographic realities to these people. And when it comes to hypocrisy bingo, Team Red and Team Blue have the same number of chips. They could play it infinitely against each other because any issue that one's a hypocrite on, so's the other one, because it's all bullshit. And the increasing realization of our demographic predicament by more and more whites means that we can expect the GOP to get even more intransigent on racial issues, not less. They will spend more time baiting white people into stupid political traps and meaningless conspiracy theories. Our movement is the only and the necessary counter to this corrosive style of politics. Some may object that some of the numbers I mentioned here do not amount to an absolute majority. So what? So what? No democracy has the right to vote our people out of existence. Particularly when many voters in this democracy, we were never asked if we wanted to open the door to them in the first place. And quite frankly, if you're white, and you don't want to preserve and empower your own people, you've already forfeited your vote, as far as I'm concerned. You don't get a say over what the rest of us do. In the end, the nation of white people will be those who actively want to be a part of it, those who want to have an actual future and to control our own political destiny. Now that means all of us here, and a growing number of our white brothers and sisters, our parents, our grandparents, and our friends across this country, and no one gets to vote us down. Thank you.